Hi there. Welcome to STAT's virtual event, Breakout Stars in Science, sponsored by the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. Thanks to you all for joining us. I'm Nick St. Fleur. I'm an Associate Editorial Director of Events here. I'm a General Assignment Reporter, and I host our podcast, Color Code, which is starting soon, our second season. I'm sure you know how this works by now, but before we get started, a few quick housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen, you should see several icons. Use the chat feature to chat amongst yourselves or to send a message directly to the STAT team. Please do not put your questions for us in the chat. But if you do have a question, and we really hope you do have some questions during this event, please use the Q&A feature to type your question and we'll try to get it answered live. In the Q&A window, you should also be able to see the questions that other attendees have asked and upvote the questions you would most like to see answered. We will be taking questions throughout the chat, so please don't wait until the end to submit. This is part of what makes these events fun and engaging. We want to hear from you, and thanks again so much for being here. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome Dr. Betty Kim, Professor of Neurosurgery at MD Anderson Cancer Center, and Anirban Mitra, Professor of Pathology and Translational Molecular Pathology at MD Anderson Cancer Center, for a sponsored introduction of today's event.
Hi, everyone. My name is Betty Kim. I'm a neurosurgeon here at MD Anderson. I specialize in brain tumors, but our lab also focuses on looking at novel agents like nanomaterials and peptides and antibodies to look at how we can modulate the innate immune system so that immunotherapy can work better.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to the folks at STAC. So I'm Anirban Mitra. I'm a professor of pathology and translational molecular path, as Nick just mentioned, but I also am the scientific director of the Pancreas Cancer Research Center here at MD Anderson. I've been a pancreas cancer researcher for 20 years, and obviously this is a very deadly disease, and a big part of our mission here is to see how we can improve survivals for this disease. So it's great to be here, and we just wanted to have a conversation with the folks who are attending this session. I want to start with Betty because obviously this is a homage to the Wonderkins that are nominated each year by STAT. So Betty, actually, for those of you who don't know, has a Wonderkin in her lab. And so we're very excited to hear what her experience has been working with the Wonderkind, and how was all of that, in terms of for the trainee that you had in your lab and for you to have a Wonderkind.
Yes, so I'm personally really excited to have a Wonderkind and to be able to co-mentor him. His name is Ifan Wang, and he was just a real invaluable resource to our laboratory. And what he led a program or a study where we're looking at new ways to develop a cancer immunotherapy platform. And we did this by using ultrasound-guided nanocomplexes that are loaded with immunotransmitters that allow us to really target the antigen-presenting cells of the immune system, allowing immunotherapies to work better. And what was really exciting is that he's now sort of taken on this role in the laboratory as a mini PI, if you will, and he's now mentoring, post-bachelor students, postdoctoral fellows, and even MD PhD students. And he's really taken on this leadership role in the laboratory. And as a mentor, it's just really exciting to see that and to be able to co-mentor him and seeing how bright he is. The faces of the future, if you will, and seeing that, one day he's going to be able to start up his own laboratory and mentor the future generations going forward. So it's really exciting to be part of this program.
Wonderful. Well, I just say that we are very proud of all past, current, and future Wonderkins who are listening in, because again, you are the future for not just cancer research, which is what we do, but also biotechnology and biomedicine in general. So this is a wonderful opportunity for us to honor all of you who are tuning in today.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you a question. So MD Anderson has sponsored the STAT Wonderkin now for about 5 years. Why do you think it is a priority in terms of supporting the next generation of researchers, and how do you do this on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Obviously, our mission here at Anderson is very much aligned with the National Cancer Plan, which is to end cancer as we know it. And a big part of that is to mentor our future generation of researchers. They are, after all, the ones who will be driving this progress in the years to come. And so at MD Anderson, we do a lot of things for our trainees, from both postdoctoral fellows, graduate students, all the way to early career faculty. So, for example, and you know this, Betty, because you're a physician scientist yourself, and we have a very thriving physician scientist program here. I'm part of that committee. All early career physician scientists have a mentorship committee where they get really guidance on a day-to-day basis in terms of the direction of their research, opportunities for grants, etc. And then for our postdoctoral fellows and for our graduate students, again, we have tremendous opportunities for mentorship, internal funding mechanisms over and above what you can get from extramural opportunities. I mean, just speaking on a personal basis, I've had graduate students in my lab who, for the entirety of their PhD, I never had to pay a dime because they were always able to get all these internal funding mechanisms that they were able to tap into. So there's a lot of these resources that are available. Most recently, MD Anderson, as many of you will know, initiated the Allison Institute, named after our Nobel laureate, Jim Allison, who we are also proud of, who's made such a tremendous difference in the area of cancer immunotherapy through his fundamental discoveries. And so the Allison Institute, again, the goal of that is to create an ecosystem that will allow many of our trainees and early career faculty to thrive, both in discovery science, in basic fundamental immunology, but also translational cancer immunotherapy, much like what Betty is doing in her lab.
Oh, thank you.
So Betty, I have a question for you, because you trained at MD Anderson, and then you were faculty somewhere else and then came back home, so to speak. So what brought you back?
It's the people. In one word. And I think MD Anderson has this tremendous amount of support from the department, divisional, and also institutional level. And I think the people is what makes a difference. I come to work just eager and excited, and it's just a lot of fun. Every corner of MD Anderson, you look around, and the people that you meet are just thought leaders. They're world leaders in every aspect of cancer research and cancer therapy. And we all have this collective goal to really end cancer, whether that be through better diagnostics, better therapies, and even prevention of cancer. And so we all have the same goal of ending cancer. And I just love this close-knit community that's very collaborative. And also the patient that we serve is really important as well for physician scientists. So I have a question for you. Speaking about MD Anderson in the context of Houston, how do you feel about MD Anderson and how its role is in the Texas Medical Center and its role in innovating?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for those of you who don't know, this is my 10th year at MD Anderson. And I've really grown to love this city. This is where my family grew up, and it is incredible. You will not see this on the screen, but when I look out of my window, I see the vast Texas Medical Center around me, all these amazing medical institutions, these buildings going up every single day. There is a entire new setup called TMC3 that's coming up, that's going to be a hub for biotechnology, for collaborative science between all the institutions in the Texas Medical Center. It's just incredible. Every day there seems to be a sort of new things going up here within the Texas Medical Center. And being in Houston, it is often surprising to me just how incredibly diverse the city is. I moved here from the Northeast, and just on an everyday basis, we see people from all over the world here who are doing research in these institutions around the Texas Medical Center, including MD Anderson. You never know in the grocery line who we're going to be standing behind or what accent from around the world you're going to hear. You have restaurants, a thriving opera scene. It's just incredible. And so I'm just so glad that I'm here and my family were able to partake of the diversity that Houston presents. So this was great, Betty. And again, I want to thank STAT for giving us this opportunity to talk a little bit about MD Anderson, all the wonderful things we're doing here. And again, congratulations to all the Wonderkins. We're very proud of you. And now back to you, Nick.
Wonderful, wonderful. Wonderkin wonderful, if you will. Thank you to Dr. Kim and to Anirban for the intro. Now, here to join me for today's main discussion, please welcome to the virtual stage from the Wonderkid class of 2020, Dr. Altaf Sadi, Assistant Professor of Neurology at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School, And joining us is from the class of Wonderkin, from the class of 2017, we have Dr. Eleanor Crew Smith, who is a director at Vertex Pharmaceuticals. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Sadi and Dr. Smith. So I think the best way for us to kind of start off this conversation is with something a little fun. So I'd love for you both to introduce yourselves and then tell us about that moment when you found out you were a Wonderkin. I mean, did you know what stat was? Was it exciting? Were you skeptical at first? So I'll start with you, Dr. Smith. Ooh, tell us a bit about who you are, what you do, and what that moment was like when you found out you were a Wonderkind.
Hi, Nick. Thanks for asking that question. And of course, thank you to Stat for the invitation to be on this panel today. Really appreciate it and looking forward to the conversation. So I guess intro to myself, I'm actually an island girl at heart. I'm from the United States Virgin Islands, and that's kind of where I got my first exposure to sickle cell disease, which is one of the topics we'll probably talk about today. But sickle cell disease basically brought me to Vertex because of the work that they were doing here on that disease. And upon getting here, did some really great work, I think, here. And then I got an email saying, "Congrats, you are a Wonderkin." And I had no idea what they were talking about. I didn't know what it was. I actually Googled it to figure out what that meant. And I wasn't even sure if it was real, right? Or why I was deserving of it. And so there was some disbelief, but after, a few hours and a few conversations back and forth, I realized that it was a real thing. And I definitely felt honored and excited to be part of the inaugural class for the Wonderkins.
So I'm sure nothing came up when you Googled it.
Nothing.
Now, Dr. Sadi, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of that moment when you found out you were a Wonderkind. You were class of 2020, so we had some reputation by then.
Yes, I was going to say my story's a little bit different in that I had heard about the Stat Wonderkins before. I had written an op-ed for Stat News and had worked with the then editor, Pat Scarrett, and was really impressed with that experience and had added myself to all the Stat News listservs. And so would get, the morning emails about science news and just really appreciated what Stat News offered in sort of the science journalism realm, which I felt was really novel. And I had seen sort of previous Stat Wonderkins featured, in the previous cohorts. And so when I found out the news, was really excited because I had been so impressed by previous cohorts. I have to say, at the time that I sort of got the news, I had just started my faculty position at Mass General. So I'm general neurologist at Mass General, an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School. And my focus in terms of research is really health equity. And I really focused on forcibly displaced populations, sort of both in the community and in immigration prisons. But at the time, I had just started my position. I had a 3-month-old, and so I feel like that whole time is like a blur. So I don't remember the exact moment, but it was really exciting, I think, especially because I had, known the prior cohorts and had been really impressed and continue to be impressed with sort of Stat, what you guys offer in terms of your place in science journalism.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Sadi. I did want to note for those watching that if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the Q&A, and I'd love to ask them to our panelists here. And I also wanted to note that unfortunately, Dr. Andrew Bazari wasn't able to join us today. But if you have questions for him, let us know as well. I could probably forward them his way. So Dr. Smith, tell us again about the work you were doing at that point in your career, back in 2017, when you found out you were a Wonderkin. What kind of projects were you working on? Where were you in the stage of your career?
Yeah, I guess I could give a little historical reference
I
here.
love history.
I mentioned I'm from the Virgin Islands, right? And that's kind of where I got my first exposure to sickle cell disease. In the seventh grade, you learn about genetics and Mendel and his P's and, how traits are inherited, your eye color, your hair color, things like that, your height. But we also learn that diseases can be inherited in much the similar way, right? One, allele from your mom and one from your dad. And one of the poster diseases for that type of inheritance is sickle cell disease. So very fascinated by it, went home, talked to my parents about, what we did that day and told them about sickle cell disease. And they're like, oh, we actually think you might be a carrier. Like you have the trait for sickle cell. So imagine going, home from school with this information, learning in school how devastating this disease is, right? I mean, it reduces the it reduces the lifespan of folks who have the disease. Lots of people are not expected to live past the age of 50. It's debilitating, excessive pain, anemia, all these things that go along with the disease. And then to hear, oh, it's in our family, you are a carrier, this potentially will affect your children and your grandchildren, right? And so from then I was kind of like, I got to do something about this. I was very interested in it from a scientific standpoint, but then also from a personal standpoint. And I was like, I want to help people who are living with sickle cell disease somehow. But I actually faint when I see blood. So this MD doctor thing was not in the cards for me. At least I didn't think so. But I wrote in my personal statement for college that I wanted to help people with sickle cell disease. And I went to Princeton University and I got bit by the research bug. So I was like, okay, well, I could actually be a doctor, but just a PhD doctor, right? And so after lots of great mentorship there at Princeton, I moved on to Yale and I joined a lab in the cell biology department that was actually working on leukemia, which is also another blood disease. So it's even though it's sort of like this love-hate relationship, with blood. And so I worked there a lot on, getting the techniques that I needed to work in that field, actually overcame my fear of blood from a lot of the mouse in vivo work that I was doing. And then I decided for a postdoc, I needed to actually get back to where I wanted to be, and that was in the sickle cell disease field. And so I came up to Boston Children's Hospital and I joined the lab of Dr. Stuart Orkin, who was doing a lot of work in that field and had been doing work for a long time, right? I wanted someone who was deeply committed to this disease and helping people with the disease. And so I joined his lab, and the work that I did there, that was kind of around the CRISPR-Cas9 revolution. I remember 2012, that the papers really started to come about that as a tool. And we worked for the next few years on trying to understand how we could use this technology to understand the regulation of hemoglobin, which is the gene that's mutated in sickle cell disease. And so we published a lot of great work there. And I guess I caught the notice of Vertex Pharmaceuticals, and they reached out to me. And that was the time when I was making a transition out of my training as a postdoc, and I decided to join Vertex there. And so though I think what was attractive to me about Vertex was just that they seemed to be really committed to working on sickle cell disease. And I was going to have the opportunity to try new things. And so that's kind of what brought me there. And I brought those skills to Vertex, and then I guess they noticed it. And then that's where the recognition came from.
Can I just say how much I love your story? I mean, you were talking about learning about it as a kid, learning about, how you might have some relation to it through genetics and such, wanting to find a way to kind of find treatments for this or help find cures for it and such, and having this, as you put it, this fear of blood, right? But then finding another alternative for you to address this blood disease as a PhD and overcoming your fear of blood. So today, no more fear of blood.
I wouldn't quite say that. There's still some queasiness there, but my thing is I've learned how to work with it. Yeah.
That is incredible. And we will certainly be asking you some more questions about your work. And if there are people in the audience who have questions as well, feel free to put them in the Q&A. And then Dr. Sadi, give us your kind of origin story here up until that point when you became a wonderkin. What brought you to where you were?
Thanks. And Dr. Smith, I loved hearing your story. And we share a Yale connection, although I was there for undergrad, not for graduate school. I came out to Boston for that. But I would say I guess in terms of my origin story, I had always really been on the fence about entering medicine because I think my interests have really also from my personal experience, my family immigrated and had always been really attuned to the impact of, sociopolitical context. I have family in Iraq, and so sort of the Iraq War happened when I was in undergrad, and so they're always very attuned to the social political context. And I thought at that time had not really seen modeled a way where people combined sort of interest in science or medicine with these social public health issues. And honestly, I think I love the science, and so I was taking the science courses. I was really interested in it, but I just was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to marry the two together. And when I was in undergrad, I actually did an internship with Physicians for Social Responsibility. And they sort of, were really well known for advocating against nuclear war, against sort of the war in general and its impact on health. And I did that summer in DC, and I realized that I didn't want to do policy only. I felt like it was really divorced from people, and I really wanted that connection with individual patients. And so thought, okay, I have to figure out a way of combining these two things together. And, at that point in my career, just did a lot of informational interviews with people and trying to figure out people who were combining these paths together. And I think slowly as I went through my career, sort of realized that people were doing that. And I think even for my path, I'm a neurologist, and this path is not a common one in neurology. So I feel like I am still trying to pave this this new path of combining different things together. But I think there are those of us who are making it work, and excited to continue to be doing that now. And I would say just in terms of a lot of my research projects really are informed from my clinical experiences. So I will mention, I do a lot of medical evaluations for asylum seekers and refugees, for example. And so one of the common issues that I had seen come up in my evaluations was traumatic brain injury. So whether that was from torture or survivors of intimate partner violence who sustained head injury. And so I, seeing that come up again and again, and then being like, I need to figure out a way to address this and study this, right? So I think a lot of the projects that I do, that again focused on health equity and forcibly displaced populations very much are born out of what I see in the clinic or in my work working with these populations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sadi. And I'd love if you could elaborate a little bit more, share with us, what is it like working with these populations, asylum seekers, refugees, immigrants? What are some of the challenges as well that they face in our healthcare system that you work hard to overcome?
That's a really big question. But I guess the first thought that came to my head when you asked that question was that I do think oftentimes when I even begin the topic of like, this is the population that I work with, I think people have this reaction of like, oh, this is super depressing. And it can be, right? It is really heavy work in terms of listening to the incredible trauma that people have been exposed to. And certainly I think even when I began doing training around this work and attending trainings around this work, the topic of vicarious trauma came up often, right? Of, whether it's providers, you're listening to these stories, and it's really challenging, I think, as being on the receiving end of these stories, right? But I think something that gets on, or doesn't get as much attention as it should, is the concept of vicarious resilience. And I think that that's something that I really experience as well, because I think, people are not the sum of their trauma stories, right? There is so much more that we don't capture in our research projects that boil people down to these variables or measures, right? Or this trauma score, or you have head injury, yes, no. And I think just my work, whether it's sort of the research or clinical end, I'm exposed to these difficult stories, but also just the incredible resilience that people have. And I think that that's the first thing when you were asking that question that came to mind, that I feel like I just wanted to make sure to address, because I do feel like people have that sort of initial reaction to, hearing my work. And I fully understand that. But, at the same time, it is what gives me hope and inspiration in my work.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for sharing that. And I love that term or that phrase you have introduced us to, vicarious resilience. Wow. Dr. Smith, could you tell us a little bit about, I guess, the communities that are front of mind with your work, particularly the Black community, which sickle cell disease disproportionately affects, and how that is a driving factor for the kind of work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to echo on that term, vicarious resilience. I feel like that probably also comes up within this population as well. So I work with sickle cell disease, which predominantly affects folks of African ancestry, right? And so it is in communities of color that we tend to see this. And the stories that you hear from folks about their experiences in the healthcare system are also very, can be very traumatic, right, as well. And so it's actually engaging with patients and talking with families who are helping to care for individuals living with sickle cell disease is what drives me to do what I do every day, right? Is there something that I could be doing to help make their lives better, right? It's the idea of combining your passion and what you're good at with making a purpose or making a difference in this world, right? And so the communities that the sickle cell disease community, individuals are experiencing pain on a regular basis. And it's not just pain that we think, oh, you take Advil and you move on, right? This is pain that prevents folks from being able to hold a job, from being able to go and spend time with their families or, children, and go see their children do sports. Like, you hear lots and lots of stories. I don't like the word stories, right? But this is their day-to-day. And so what I am working to do, right, is to make sure that they can live better lives and live their lives to the fullest. And so that's what keeps me going.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. One thing that was brought up by the sponsor speakers and was brought up in both of your backgrounds to an extent was this importance of mentorship. I'd love if you could both speak a little bit to the impact that mentorship has had in your careers as early career, when you were like early career scientist, and then any, stories or anecdotes or anything you want to share about maybe also paying it forward a bit. A lot of people on the call here might be early career scientists, researchers, doctors and such, and they might want to hear a bit about other mentorship relationships that have really helped people like yourselves get to where you are. So Dr. Sadi, I'd love to start with you if you could share any advice or any anecdotes about mentorship.
Yeah, I mean, mentorship is so, so important. I would say the two things that I have learned just throughout my journey as a sort of early career, one is not to be limited by just thinking that you have to have mentors only in your field. So I'm a neurologist, and there are not a lot of neurologists that are sort of in the pathway that I'm in terms of health disparities or health services research, even thinking about the blending of research and advocacy. And I think sometimes people are discouraged by that, but I think I found incredible mentorship from people in other disciplines, and even outside in other specialties in medicine, but even other disciplines entirely. So having mentors in sociology, right, who can give me input, mentors for based in community organizations or in legal spaces. And so I think that's just the one point of not being limited by thinking that you only can get mentorship from sort of just what you are focusing on. Mentorship can really come from a lot of people, not strictly just in your discipline or in your particular research area of interest. And then I would say the other piece that I think needs to get discussed more also, that I have realized now, but I don't think I had an appreciation of early in my career, was that it's really mentors, not mentor. And I think oftentimes when we talk about it, it's always like, who's your mentor? And you have like this one person, and maybe, yes, in grant applications, you're putting this one primary mentor down. But in reality, it's really plural. And it's usually a team of people that you might be going for more career advice, someone who's your mentor around, the method, someone who might be more of a content, someone who, there is just it's rarely ever mentor singular. And so that's the other point that I just think is important to hear. And I would have told myself sort of earlier on.
Great. No, that's great to hear, kind of building up a mentor community, if you will, or I've heard it described as like a board of directors, and as if you were your own CEO of your career path. Dr. Smith, what about yourself? Tell us a little bit about mentors in your life, or the impact that they've had on you and your career.
Yeah, I think when I was starting out as a youngin, I would say in college, I didn't really realize the impact or the importance of having mentors. But what I've always been very, conscious of is my relationships with people, right? And I'm one who likes to go deep into a relationship rather than sort of like have a lot of friends. And I think that has really served me well throughout my career. It's actually funny. I was just in DC this past weekend, and I got to stay at the house of my Princeton undergrad thesis advisor, right? I mean, like, that's how she was my mentor. She's the one who helped me understand research, helped me run my first sequencing gel, right? And now she's there playing with my children, right? Like, it's one of these things that I didn't appreciate as I was getting to know her, but she is someone who I know that I can always go back to, and she's part of my board, right? And then we talk about getting bit by the research bug. There was a mentor, a professor at Princeton, who also called me into her office after class one day and says, "What do you want to do with your life?" Right?
The big question.
Right. What do you want to do? And I mean, I didn't really know. I was thinking about maybe genetic counseling, and she went through this and we talked about various things. And she sat down, she's like, "These are the schools I think you should apply to. I really think you're good with research." And she really guided me through that. And I was actually, I was talking to her the other day, right? These are very long relationships, and they know me very well in a way that I'm probably a lot of times better than I know myself, right? And they have this perspective that I didn't have. And I think that's one of the things that I would encourage folks to do, is really try to stay connected with those in your life who have made an impact on you, because they care, right? And if they care, they're going to be looking out for you and, advising you in the way that they think can be helpful, right? And so mentors have really played a huge role and impact. In my mentor in graduate school, I was in a leukemia lab, but she still advised me and allowed me to go to conferences on sickle cell disease, right? Because she knew that that's where my passion was. And to have her put sort of my interest over her own lab interest, she's paying for these conferences and it's not even on her subject matter, right? I think was very, very important for me. And she's the one who connected me with Stuart Orkin here at Boston Children's Hospital, right? And so it's all these little connections along the way that have definitely helped to chart my course. And now I try to pay it forward. I'm always, whenever anyone wants to talk to me or, grab a coffee, I'm always up for that, particularly Black scientists. I'm somewhat partial to that group, because a lot of times there aren't others for them to go to in our company, in academia. And so they see me and they just want to sit down and have that conversation. What is the reality of the situation, right? And having those real conversations. And I think that's very important for the next generation to be aware of what the reality is, right? What's possible, and where they actually really want to go.
That was really great, and I see a lot of myself as a mentor in the words that you've shared there. So I guess jumping now into research, I'm sure we have people who are watching who want to know more about kind of the nitty-gritty of the work that you both do. I'll start with you, Dr. Smith. So tell us a little bit about the actual work that you're doing, day in, day out in the lab right now, as it applies to sickle cell disease.
Yeah, so I So as you see, my title now is director. So when I was first of Wonderkin, I was a research scientist. I shouldn't say just, because research scientist extremely important.
Extremely.
Who gets the work done, right? And so I was definitely I was at the lab bench. To be clear, I'm actually part of the small molecule sickle cell disease program here at Vertex Pharmaceuticals, and it's really early stages. So it's very much about the bench research and the discoveries that we are making there. But as I've grown in my career and as Vertex has allowed me to explore, my abilities and fit in where I am needed, I have now taken on more of a leadership role. So I have a team of other PhD scientists, all working on sickle cell disease as well. But then in that, I work cross-functionally with many other teams and groups, biophysicists, biochemists, we're talking about chemists, biomarker folks, all across the scientific realm, and even outside the scientific realm, when we're talking about, patient advocacy, patient engagement, or all sorts of different regulatory, like all across the company.
Mhm.
And so I serve as a kind of go-between a lot of times between research and some of these other functions. So it's really cool because I know the science, I get to see the science, I get to see the discoveries, I live vicariously through those researchers who are still at the bench. But then I also get to see another aspect of what it takes to actually bring a drug to patients, right? And what all that entails. So definitely a lot more leadership, a lot more organization, a lot more strategy, a lot more decision making in terms of where the project is going and how
Mhm.
we're going to be able to develop in the career. So it's not even just the science, it's also about career development in
Mhm.
this role and making sure others are progressing in the way that they want to be able to progress. So
And
yeah, it's a lot of things.
if I could get a little nerdy here, what is it about the small molecule, I guess, approach or aspect of sickle cell disease treatment that gets you so excited or that gets you so passionate? Like, why that aspect?
So for me, I mean, I think that there's a lot of, buzz and excitement about things in the gene therapy space, and duly deserved, right? There's a lot of great things happening. And my postdoc work was really some of the work that helped to enable some of these new therapies. So very excited about that. But when we're thinking about areas of the world that are mostly affected with sickle cell disease, like sub-Saharan Africa, we think about, the applicability of some of these, or how we'll be able to bring these types of other complicated and complex therapies to those parts of the world. We have to be realistic about that. And I think small molecules gives us the opportunity to serve a lot more patients. And so that's where I sit, and that's what keeps me excited.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Smith. And now, Dr. Sadi, to you. I know you touched a bit upon the work that you do right now, but were there any particular projects or areas of research that you're, particularly passionate about that you want to share with our audience here today?
There are multiple.
I'm sure there
but
are.
I will say, so I am a mixed methods researcher, so meaning I do both quantitative and qualitative research, like health services research. Quantitative meaning sort of doing like statistical analysis, whether it's sort of data sets or other surveys of, large groups of people where we've collected primary data, and then the qualitative research, whether it's sort of focus group or interview data. And I have to say, I really love the qualitative data because it's always just like so rich. And I always try to integrate it into my various projects. I'd say one of the projects that continues to give me so much life is one that I'm doing with a colleague, Dr. Caitlin Patler, who's a sociologist at UC Davis. And we're looking at the impact of release from immigration prisons during the COVID-19 pandemic and how that's impacted the health of individuals who've been released as well as their households. And I think that's the one that comes to mind. And I mentioned the piece about the mixed methods research because it's really, whether it's doing the interviews or listening to the interviews afterwards and just hearing in people's stories and sort of both the impact of detention that it had on their health is always so moving. And I think the other aspect of that project that I really love is that it is interdisciplinary. And I do feel like from the angle of thinking about health equity and addressing health disparities, we do really need to move towards interdisciplinary projects. And so that's another aspect of that particular project that I love because it is, interdisciplinary. And so I'm always exposed to sort of different approach and thinking. And that pushes me as a scientist of sort of working with someone who's in another discipline.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Sadi, are there any other anecdotes, stories, or particular experiences from your work that really stick out to you that kind of shows why what you're doing is so important that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'll thank you for asking that. I think a lot of the one that comes to mind is a project that I was involved with Physicians for Human Rights, which is a sort of a national organization or international organization that was awarded the Nobel Prize some years back for their humanitarian work. But I was a co-author on a report with them around the diagnosis of excited delirium, which is a diagnosis or a term that's been really pushed by law enforcement to sort of justify the use of super aggressive police tactics and to sort of absolve responsibility of in police custody deaths. And, we published a report on this that, did a really deep dive into the history and sort of the literature that's been written about it. The scientific literature has been written about it, which is really sort of full of conflicts of interest with people who work with law enforcement. But needless to say, we, did this report and have, tried to raise awareness about this diagnosis that sort of hides behind, medically sounding legitimate terms. And, just last year, I believe this was, we're in 2023, just last year, the Bay Area Rapid Transit Police, they said they are going to stop using excited delirium and sort of cited our report as one of the things that sort of motivated that decision. I know that there are efforts sort of locally and at states like in California to try to phase out the use of excited delirium. Professional organizations that have come out and said, yes, this is not a legitimate diagnosis and law enforcement shouldn't be sort of hiding behind this bogus term. So I think, that's the other sort of experience or project that I've worked on that really stands out to me, because I think it really speaks to the impact that we can have, again, when we make partnerships outside of our academic silos, right, with organizations, and also when we address, especially as physicians, issues that are not restricted to what we see in the clinic room, right? There's so much that affects people's health that is not just what happens in my encounter with them when I see someone in clinic.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Sadi. And, we were fortunate enough to have you on our podcast, Color Code, the first season, to speak about this at length. So thank you again.
Yes,
Dr.
check
Smith,
out the podcast.
You plugged it, not me. Dr. Smith, I'd love to ask you a bit about your growth into this leadership role as a director now, being in charge of, as you put it, multiple different people, but also people with different expertise. For the people who are listening here who might want to make a similar transition, what was that like? What were the challenges and how do you enjoy it so far?
Yeah. So for me, it happened without quite me knowing, I think. I think as individual contributors, you have the opportunity to be leaders, right? And just because people don't report to you or you may not be managing folks, that doesn't mean that you aren't developing the skills to be a leader anyway, right? And a lot of those qualities, I think, are developed before we actually get into these positions of leadership. But to me, the challenges have been, learning to work with people from all over, with many different experiences, different backgrounds. It's challenging, but it's also rewarding, and it's fun, and it's what makes the work better, right? The diversity that is out there. And the one thing that I think that has really helped me, is I talked about this before, is my interest in just people, right? Being genuinely interested in people, interested in their stories, interested in their experiences, their skills, where they want to actually go in life, what motivates them, right? Because if you can understand what motivates them, it's a lot easier for you to help them navigate through the goals that the company has set for them, and also the goals that they have set for themselves. So I think learning about people, getting to know people, learning how to talk to people, communicating with people, engaging with people is one of the skills that I think has been most useful for me in this transition from an individual contributor to an actual named leader in the organization.
That's fantastic. And then Dr. Sadi, how have things changed for you over the past about 3 years now in terms of your what you're doing now compared to when you were first a wonderkind?
So I would say, like Dr. Smith, I've certainly like transitioned into supervising people and guiding them through the various research projects. So whereas 3 years ago I was doing the interviews, now I have research coordinators or other staff that are doing that, and I sort of help guide them through that process and the analysis. I think also beginning to transition to more of a leadership and sort of supervisory role, really building out my team. I would say also since that time, I've been able to secure more funding. So I'm certainly less stressed out than I was 3 years ago, where I'd come in and not had as much funding. And so I've certainly, I think in terms of my own confidence, I've built that confidence. And I think some of that is very much linked to really taking or really appreciating sort of the value that I bring to my field and to science, and really owning that. And I think, there's an element of, yes, I'm more confident, I have more funding, but I think some of it is also just me in owning and recognizing the value that I bring to the table, someone who's thinking about leveraging science to uplift the voices of marginalized that are often sort of, relegated to the periphery in medicine, broadly speaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I must say that's something that I guess both of you are doing in terms of work that really helps and uplifts communities that historically have been, overlooked by medicine or overlooked in research as well. So another question, and before I ask my question, I want to remind the audience that if you have a question, do feel free to put it in the Q&A with the few minutes we have left. But the question I have for both of you is looking forward now into the future. What excites you the most in terms of advances coming in your fields, or what do you have your eyes on looking forward? To you, Dr. Smith, I mean, in sickle cell disease, what are you keeping a close tabs on, or what are some of the issues that you're most tuned into looking forward?
What really excites me, I think about 6 years ago when I started at Vertex, I was very hesitant because I had this impression that the pharmaceutical industry was not interested in working on diseases that mostly affected Black people, right? And so I was hesitant to join because I said, well, maybe, in 2 years, they're going to pack up and go, and I'm not going to have a job doing what I want to do, right? But what I have seen over the last few years is just that there has been sort of many more folks have taken an interest, many more companies have taken an interest in this. And because of that, there's actually competition in this space, right? Healthy competition. I think that is only going to be beneficial for patients and their families, because people are looking at how we can really help to address this disease. So I'm excited because there are more folks in this space. And I think that the technology, for sickle cell disease, I think it's like the oldest known molecular disease, right? We knew what caused it for a really long time, over 100 years now, but our therapies haven't caught up to our actual knowledge. But I think what is happening is that we have this development of new technologies, right? And you talk about interdisciplinary study. It's just the knowledge all over the scientific community is helping now to contribute to advances in medicine, particularly for these diseases that we actually know a lot about biology-wise, but how do we actually treat it? So I'm very excited just because the technology is finally catching up to what we know biology-wise, and we can hopefully then be able to apply it and do more for these patients.
That's wonderful to hear. Fantastic answer there, Dr. Smith. And then Dr. Sadi, what about yourself and your area of expertise? What are you looking forward to in the future?
I think I am seeing increasing conversation around just sort of health equity, health disparities in medicine. I think it's really encouraging. So just this week, I'm actually attending the American Academy of Neurology conference right now, and it was this week. And I was just commenting to a colleague that when I started residency, there wasn't a single session that was around any health disparities in neurology. Like there just wasn't. I remember going through the booklet and being like, there's no sessions about this. And now here I am like 5 years later, 6 years later, and there was so much programming around that. And I do feel like there is increasing conversation about that. And I think increasingly even more nuanced conversation in terms of like, okay, yes, be interested in health disparities, but let's not, like be a tourist in this space where we care about it just because there's like this transient attention and then forget about it.
Right.
And so I do think I think that's the next step is sort of having more nuanced conversations and sort of going from, okay, yes, we recognize this is a problem, like what next, what are we going to do? But I would say just generally, I have been just increasingly hopeful that this is on people's radar and there's conversation, as evidenced by my experience at my professional organization conference this week.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sadi. And I think that that kind of swims really well into this next question from one of our viewers. Jane Von Meeren asks, I'm interested in learning a bit about how you communicate your larger goals and results with the communities you are trying to help. We are coming close to time, so I'll give you both an opportunity to answer that, and then I'll have a final question here. But starting with you, Dr. Sadi, how do you communicate with the communities that you are trying to help?
So I would say some of it might not necessarily be me directly communicating, and it really having to rely on and work with trusted intermediaries, right? So sometimes it might be better for a community health worker who has sort of established connections or relationship with someone. So I would say that, there's incredible evidence around sort of faith-based communities, right? Like, what does it mean to get the message from your pastor or imam rather than a clinician, right? Or, at the barbershop, like having that person intervene around your health, right? There is, so I think increasing recognition of the role that other individuals need to play in sort of getting this message. And again, going back to this point that I keep going back to, which is partnerships outside of our academic silos. So I would say that's one important part. And I think the second part is really demonstrating a commitment that is consistent. I think sometimes one of the things that we see is, if you don't get funding or the funding takes like a year for you to hear back, are you then not engaged with the community, right? And that's a way then the people become distrustful. It's like, well, why are you doing this work? And I think certainly in terms of it's like I do work with this community, and I have, whether or not I have had funding, right? And I think it's sort of a way to establish trust and commitment, rather than being seen as someone who's just going to come in and out whenever is convenient or is, self-beneficial.
Yeah. So, utilizing trusted messengers, follow up, and not just being a tourist, a health equity tourist in that sense. And then Dr. Smith, what about yourself when it comes to communicating research about or the work you do with sickle cell disease to the communities most affected?
Yeah, I think that's one of the differences between academia and industry. I think when I was in academia, I definitely spoke a lot more to the communities that were most affected by the disease. We're talking about my family members, right? Like you don't have to go that far, at least for me to be connected to this community. But here, as I've been at Vertex, kind of like what Dr. Saidi was saying is that there are, like, have partnerships with the community. And I think that there are various folks in our organization who are very focused on partnering with the community and building relationships and communicating the information as it is appropriate, right? And so that's kind of where we lie there. But for me personally, I stay motivated because there are opportunities for me to connect with the community on a regular basis, and I try to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. And then last question here for both of you. If we look back on the past, go back in time 3 years or 6 years, what piece of advice would you have for your past wonderkin self? That person who got that sketchy email.
Yeah.
I'll start with you, Dr. Saidi. What advice would you have for your past self, for your past wonderkin self?
I think it is, and honestly, it's still the advice that is relevant to me now, as I think I would tell myself before, is just trust yourself and in your vision of what you want your career to look like. Oftentimes people will give advice that speaks to their experience or what they have seen, right? They might be like, well, this is how I've seen things done. And if you are looking to shake things up and do things differently, that advice might not be applicable, right? So sort of holding true to your mission, sort of your North Star, and not losing sight of that. So a big element of sort of trusting in yourself and your vision.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Dr. Smith, what about yourself? What advice would you give to wonderkin Dr. Smith?
It's funny. I was going to actually use the term North Star as well.
Go right ahead. Use it as
really,
well.
What is your purpose, right? Like, what is it that you want to do? And always keep that in line of sight, right? I think that's always going to be, what we do is hard, right? I think people are kind of like, they don't trust themselves because they're having challenges, because it's not working. But honestly, that's an indication that you're doing the right thing, right? Like, because it's hard, that means that someone hasn't figured it out before. And that's why you're here, right? To work through that and to figure it out. And so it'd be, keep focused on doing good work, good science, and where it is that you wanted to go.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I know from this conversation, I will definitely be taking away the importance of finding your North Star, and also the importance of vicarious resilience. So thank you both so much for joining us. I think we're at time now. I just want to give a special thanks again to our panelists here, Dr. Saidi and Dr. Smith, for joining us today and for answering some of your really good questions here from the audience and just throughout this conversation. I also want to give a thanks to our event sponsor, the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, and to all of you out there for taking the time to join us. We also want to note that nominations are now open for our 2023 Wonderkins class. Entries are due by July 14th. Stat Wonderkins is a chance to celebrate early career researchers who are not yet independent scientists or program leaders. More information can be found at our website. STAT's upcoming Breakthrough Science Summit will be taking place May 3rd to the 4th in San Francisco and virtually. Join us to see where medicine, biology, and technology converge. More information on that can also be found at our website. We want to again say thank you to everyone for joining, and thank you to our two panelists here. Everyone, have a good day.